The silence came first, not a sudden quiet, but a slow, deep stillness, like the world had taken a long breath and forgotten how to exhale. Morty sat up in bed, eyes blinking in the soft blue light of early morning, the usual hum of strange gadgets, the distant clatter of portals opening and closing, even Rick's wild laughter. They were all gone. It was as if the universe had pressed pause, leaving behind a gentle hush where chaos once danced. He didn't understand at first what it meant. This empty quiet that filled the corners of his room, seeped into the spaces between thoughts. It felt like the moment right before sleep, when the mind drifts on the edge of dreams and waking, neither here nor there. And in that space, Morty found something strange, a softness he hadn't known he needed. The night before, the stars outside had blinked a little slower, as if they too were waiting. Morty could almost hear them humming a lullaby just beneath the surface of silence. A lullaby Rick once hummed on long, restless nights, something about distant suns and wandering comets. It was a tune that stayed with him, not as noise but as a whisper of comfort. He reached over to the bedside table, fingers brushing against a small, worn notebook. It was filled with scribbles and half-remembered sketches, maps of places they had travelled, impossible creatures, and strange symbols that never quite made sense. But now, without Rick's wild explanations, those marks felt like something quieter, like a secret garden hidden beneath the chaos. For a moment, Morty let his mind wander back to the first time he stepped through one of those glowing portals. It was terrifying and thrilling all at once, a world tumbling with colors and sounds and endless possibilities. But now, looking back from this stillness, those memories shimmered like faded photographs, soft edges blurring into gentle hues. He thought about how much he had changed since those early adventures. The boy who once clutched Rick's hand tightly, trembling with fear, had grown into someone who could stand alone in the quiet. Not because he had become braver in the usual way, but because he had learned to carry the silence with him, to find peace inside the stillness. And even though Rick wasn't here, Morty felt a strange warmth settle inside him. It wasn't loud or flashy, but steady and slow, like the comforting glow of a candle in the dark. The kind of warmth that doesn't demand anything, just holds you gently. We truly care about you, and wherever you are right now, you're safe with us. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from and what time is it there? Now grab your coffee and let's get started. Morty sat back on his pillow, eyes tracing the soft shadows on the ceiling. Outside, the sky was a quiet wash of blue and grey, the clouds drifting like slow-moving dreams. There was no rush here, no urgent need to solve problems or outrun danger, just the gentle unfolding of time. He remembered the way Rick used to say that the multiverse was infinite, always shifting, always growing. But now, without Rick's voice to guide him, the multiverse felt like a quiet garden, waiting for something to bloom in its stillness. In the days that followed, Morty found himself paying closer attention to the small things, the way sunlight filtered through the window, the soft rustle of leaves outside, the slow tick of the clock on the wall. Each moment felt like a thread weaving together a new kind of story, one that didn't need explosions or mad science to be real. Sometimes, when the world was especially quiet, Morty could hear a faint whisper in the back of his mind, like a secret message carried on the wind. It wasn't a command or a puzzle, but a gentle reminder that even in silence, there was life. There was hope. There was something waiting just beyond the horizon of sleep. He thought about the people who had touched his life, Summer with her quiet strength and steady presence, a friend whose kindness had never wavered even in the darkest times, and someone else, a figure from the edges of memory, who had taught him how to listen with his heart. Morty didn't always understand their words, but he understood their hearts. And that understanding was a kind of magic all its own. As the days stretched on, Morty began to realize that his own quiet kindness was a power, not loud or flashy, but steady and true. It was the softness that held space for others, the patience that waited without judgment, the empathy that reached out like a warm hand in the night. He learned to move with the slow dance of time, to float rather than fight the current. And in that flow, he found a new kind of freedom, the freedom to simply be. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with gentle pinks and golds, Morty sat by the window and watched the stars begin to twinkle awake. The multiverse was vast and mysterious, yes, but here in this quiet moment, it felt tender and close, like a lullaby sung just for him. And somewhere deep inside, Morty felt a soft stretch, like the world itself was yawning, settling in for a long, peaceful rest. And with that, he stretched into the stars. The mornings now felt like soft awakenings rather than abrupt starts. Morty learned to greet each day like a slow breath, a quiet unfolding rather than a race against time. The absence of Rick's whirlwind energy had left a stillness that wasn't empty, but full in a different way. A gentle canvas waiting for new colors. He would sit by the window for a while, watching the clouds drift lazily across the sky, each one carrying its own story in silence. Sometimes, the clouds would gather into strange shapes, a hand, a ship, a familiar face, and Morty would smile, knowing the multiverse was still whispering its secrets in quiet ways. Not with explosions or flashing lights, but with soft, fleeting signs meant only for those who listened. In the afternoons, he wandered through the small garden behind the house. The flowers seemed to bloom slower now, their petals unfurling with deliberate grace. Morty found comfort in this slow rhythm, as if the earth itself was teaching him patience, showing him how to grow without hurry or noise. One day, as a gentle breeze stirred the leaves, Morty noticed a butterfly resting on a cluster of lavender. Its wings were delicate and translucent, catching the sunlight in shimmering shades of blue and gold. He watched it for a long time, fascinated by its quiet grace. The butterfly didn't rush. It simply moved when it was ready, fluttering softly to the next bloom, as if it carried the world's secrets in its fragile wings. Morty felt something stir inside him, an echo of that slow, gentle courage. To move forward not with force, but with quiet intention. To let the universe unfold one small moment at a time. He thought about the power Rick once wielded, the wild, explosive genius that bent reality itself. And yet, here he was, learning a different kind of strength. Not the kind that tore through worlds, but the kind that held space for others to be. That afternoon, Morty met Summer outside by the old oak tree. She was sitting quietly, her sketchbook resting on her lap, fingers tracing invisible shapes on the worn paper. She looked up and smiled softly. "Hey, Morty. You look different, calmer." Morty chuckled, a warm sound that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Yeah, I guess I am. It's like everything's slowed down, you know, like the whole world took a deep breath." Summer nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "I think sometimes we need that, to stop chasing everything and just be." They sat together in companionable silence, watching the shadows stretch long and slow beneath the branches. Morty realized that this quiet connection, simple, unspoken, was one of the strongest things he'd ever known. It wasn't about words or big gestures, it was about presence. about letting someone know you were there, even when the world felt like it was spinning too fast. That evening, as twilight wrapped the sky in soft purples and blues, Morty found himself alone by the window again. The stars blinked awake, slow and steady, like distant lullabies sent across the cosmos. He remembered the way Rick used to explain the multiverse, endless possibilities, infinite worlds spinning in wild chaos. But now Morty felt something different. It was as if the multiverse was breathing with him, a gentle pulse beneath the quiet. In the stillness, he felt a small flicker of something new. Hope, perhaps, or the first stirrings of peace. He closed his eyes and let the quiet wash over him, like waves lapping softly against a shore. And somewhere in that peaceful night, Morty dreamed of endless skies and slow-moving stars, of whispered secrets carried on the wind, and of the soft, steady light that lives inside all of us. And somewhere, he was still out there, napping in the sun. The garden had become Morty's quiet refuge. It was a small patch of earth tucked behind the house, where wildflowers grew in soft clusters, and the air was thick with the scent of jasmine and morning dew. Here, in the gentle light of afternoon, Morty found himself drawn to the slow unfolding of life. It was not the kind of adventure that blasted open portals or spun through dizzying dimensions. No, this was a journey of stillness, a discovery of the delicate moments that often go unnoticed, the tremble of a leaf in the breeze, the steady hum of bees gathering nectar, the way sunlight pooled like warm honey on soft petals. Morty knelt beside a patch of violets, their purple faces tilted toward the sun. He traced a finger along the slender stem, feeling the quiet pulse beneath the surface, a rhythm slow and steady as his own heartbeat. In this garden, Morty realized, growth was never rushed. It unfolded softly, patiently, as if the earth itself knew the secret of time's gentle flow. It reminded him of something Rick once said, though not in the usual chaotic voice. It was more of a whisper, a fleeting thought caught in the spaces between their wild adventures. Sometimes the smallest things hold the greatest power, Rick had said, his eyes distant. It's not always the flashy stuff that changes the world. Often, it's the quiet, unseen moments. Morty thought about that as he watched a caterpillar inch its way along a leaf. There was no hurry, no grand spectacle, just slow, deliberate movement towards something new. He realized that in this gentle patience there was a kind of courage. The courage to be soft in a world that often demanded hardness. The courage to listen, to wait, to nurture. Sometimes Morty felt the world's weight settle on his shoulders. The echo of all the chaos he'd seen, the burden of being someone who once lived in the eye of storms. But here, in the garden's quiet embrace, that weight seemed lighter. The world was not a place to conquer or escape, but a place to care for. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that stretched like sleepy fingers across the grass, Morty's thoughts drifted to the people he loved. Summer's steady presence had become a gentle anchor, a reminder that even in silence, connection thrived. He remembered the way she looked at him once, her eyes soft and knowing, as if she understood the things he couldn't say. There was also the quiet wisdom of a friend who never judged, who offered a steady hand when words failed. Morty didn't always understand their guidance, but he felt it deeply, like a lullaby sung in a language only the heart could know. And then there was Rick, distant now, a memory wrapped in mystery and warmth. Morty realized that even in absence, love lingered like a soft light, never truly gone. The garden taught him that love, too, was something that grew slowly, watered by patience and quiet moments. One evening, as the sky melted into shades of rose and gold, Morty sat beneath the old oak tree, the leaves whispering secrets in the gentle breeze. He closed his eyes and let the world slip away, feeling himself part of something vast and tender. In that moment, Morty understood that his journey was not about grand heroics or explosive endings. It was about the slow dance of becoming, about learning to hold the softest parts of himself with gentle hands. And somewhere, deep inside, he felt a small seed take root, ready to bloom when the time was right, and with that he stretched into the stars. Sometimes the quietest moments hold the loudest truths. Morty discovered this on a slow afternoon when the world seemed to pause just long enough for him to listen. Not with his ears, but with something deeper. He was sitting on the porch, legs dangling over the edge, watching the way the light shifted through the leaves. The shadows moved like soft dancers, folding over one another in patterns that felt like whispered stories. He thought about the days before, the wild chaos of dimension hopping and frantic escapes. It felt like another life, a dream too bright and loud to hold on to for long. Now, the silence wrapped around him like a warm blanket, and for the first time he felt the space to breathe, to be. Morty reached into his pocket and pulled out the small notebook he kept, a collection of thoughts, sketches, and scraps of memories. The pages weren't neat or organized, but they were his. Each mark told a story, a feeling, a moment of stillness caught in time. He flipped through the pages slowly, fingers tracing the edges of drawings that looked like constellations, strange creatures, and maps of places that might only exist in dreams. It was a quiet map of his own heart, charted in lines and whispers. Somewhere deep inside, Morty realized that this was his own kind of journey. Not the one that hurtled through endless realities, but the one that moved slowly through the landscape of the soul. He thought about the people who had shaped him, the steady light of summer, the quiet wisdom of a friend who never rushed, and the distant warmth of Rick's love, like a star burning gently on the edge of memory. He didn't always understand their words, but he understood their hearts. That was enough. As the afternoon light softened into evening, Morty felt a gentle pull, a kind of invitation to look inward, to sit with himself without judgment or fear. He closed his eyes and listened. The world held its breath with him, waiting, patient. In the quiet, he felt a flicker, a small, steady flame that was his own kindness, his own courage. It wasn't loud or flashy, but it was real. Sometimes, he thought, that's all you need. The sky above deepened into twilight, stars blinking awake like distant lullabies. Morty smiled softly, feeling the weight of the world shift just a little lighter on his shoulders. He reached out, tracing a slow arc in the air, imagining the multiverse as a gentle swirl of light and shadow, always changing but always beautiful. And somewhere, in the soft hush of night, Morty stretched quietly, ready for whatever came next. And somewhere, he was still out there, napping in the sun. The days folded softly into one another, each one a gentle echo of the last. Morty found himself moving through the world like a slow river, steady, calm, and quietly sure. The sharp edges of the past had softened, blurred into a comforting haze of memory and hope. One morning, he wandered into the attic, a place he hadn't thought much about since the chaos began. Dust motes floated like tiny stars in the beams of sunlight that slipped through the small window. The air smelled faintly of old paper and forgotten stories. Morty pulled out a battered trunk tucked beneath the rafters. Inside were relics from before, the tattered comic books, old toys, and a faded photograph of a younger Rick and him, grinning wide, caught in a moment of wild adventure. He smiled softly, the edges of his lips curling like a secret. Those were days full of noise and rush, of frantic plans and impossible escapes. But now, in this quiet attic, those memories felt like whispers in a long-forgotten song. There was something tender about remembering, a gentle ache that wasn't sadness, but the soft glow of having been loved. Morty ran his fingers over the photograph, feeling the pulse of 1,000 stories folded between the edges of the frame. He realized that his journey was not about what had been lost, but about what had been found, small pieces of himself scattered like stars across time. He closed the trunk and settled onto the dusty floor, letting the quiet settle around him like a familiar melody. Outside, the world hummed softly, birds singing distant lullabies, the breeze carrying the scent of pine and earth. Morty breathed deeply, feeling the steady rhythm of life, slow and sure, beneath the surface of everything. He thought about the quiet strength that had grown inside him, the patience to wait, the courage to listen, the kindness that didn't demand anything in return. Sometimes it was the smallest things that held the greatest meaning. He remembered the gentle words Summer had shared one evening when the sky was painted in the softest shades of twilight. "It's okay to be still," she had said, her voice a calm river. "You don't always have to run or fight. Sometimes being still is the bravest thing you can do." Those words stayed with Morty like a warm blanket, wrapping him in comfort when the world felt too loud. He stood and walked to the window, watching as the sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows that stretched like sleepy hands across the land. The multiverse was vast, full of infinite possibilities. But here, in this small, quiet moment, Morty felt a deep peace, a soft assurance that he was exactly where he needed to be. As twilight deepened, stars blinked awake one by one, scattered like tiny lanterns across the darkening sky. Morty watched them with a gentle smile, feeling the slow stretch of night unfolding around him, and with that he stretched into the stars. There are days that feel like gentle loops, moments repeating not in a circle of boredom, but in the comfort of familiarity. And Morty had begun to notice them more often, those quiet repetitions that carried a kind of soft reassurance, like hearing the same lullaby each night before sleep. This morning was one of them. The air was cool and still, and the sky held that pale, washed blue light that only comes before the sun fully rises. Morty stood barefoot on the porch, a mug of coffee warming his hands, steam curling into the air like sleepy thoughts drifting upward. The world felt hushed, as if it too was taking a slow breath. Somewhere far away, a bird began its morning song. 3 notes, a pause, then 3 notes again. It was the same call he'd heard the day before, and the day before that, and yet it never felt the same. Each time it landed differently in his heart. Morty sipped his coffee slowly, feeling the weight of the mug, the smooth edge against his lips. These were details he might have missed in the rush of old adventures. Back then, mornings were brief staging grounds before chaos swept in. But now, mornings were stories in themselves. He found himself thinking about Rick, not the larger-than-life scientist, but the quiet flashes of him that most people never saw. The moments between inventions and explosions. Like the way Rick sometimes stared out the garage window for long stretches, as if watching a memory instead of the sky. Or how, late at night, his voice softened when he thought Morty was asleep, humming a song without words. Those moments stayed with Morty now, stitched into his days like threads of a quilt he didn't know he was making. When the sun rose a little higher, Morty wandered into the garden. Dew clung to the grass, sparkling like tiny stars that had fallen during the night. He crouched beside the lavender bushes, brushing a hand gently over the blossoms. The scent rose around him, calming and sweet, like the memory of something he couldn't quite name. He thought about the butterfly he'd seen a few days ago, how it moved from flower to flower without hurry. It struck him now how similar his own days had become. Soft, deliberate, touching each moment fully before moving to the next. Summer joined him a little later, carrying a blanket draped over her shoulders. She didn't say anything at first, just stood beside him, breathing in the cool morning air. Finally she spoke, her voice quiet enough to almost be part of the breeze. "You've been different lately." Morty glanced at her, smiling faintly. "In a bad way?" "In a good way," she said, eyes still on the garden. "Like you're more here. Even when you're quiet, you feel present." Morty let her words sink in. Presence. It wasn't something he'd ever aimed for, but it felt right. It was like standing still and realizing you were exactly where you were meant to be without needing to prove anything to anyone. They stood there together for a while, letting the silence speak for them. Later, Morty wandered down the small path that led into the woods behind the house. The air was cool in the shade, carrying the faint scent of pine and earth. He listened to the gentle crunch of leaves beneath his feet, the way branches swayed slowly above him, filtering sunlight into shifting shapes on the ground. Somewhere in that walk, he realized something simple but important. Not every journey needed to be measured by distance. Some could be measured by stillness, by the quiet strength of simply staying with a moment long enough to feel it fully. By the time he reached the edge of the woods, the sky had shifted into the soft gold of late afternoon. Morty paused, letting the light wash over him. It felt like the day itself was exhaling, settling in for rest. He took one last deep breath, feeling the air fill his lungs, and smiled to himself. The multiverse was still out there, infinite and wild, but right now this little patch of earth, this stillness was enough. And somewhere, in that gentle quiet, he stretched into the stars. Sometimes the night feels like a quiet friend who knows all your secrets but never rushes to speak them aloud. Morty found these nights especially tender, when the world had softened into shadows and the sky stretched wide and slow above him, heavy with stars like distant promises. He liked to sit by the window, watching the constellations twinkle, their slow, steady dance a lullaby of light. Each star seemed to whisper something old, something deep, like a secret he almost understood, but wasn't quite ready to hold. There was a stillness to the night that called to him, a gentle invitation to pause and be present with himself. In those moments, Morty thought of the times Rick had spoken softly about the multiverse, not as a chaotic mess of possibilities, but as a tapestry woven from infinite threads, each one delicate and unique. Every choice, every moment, Rick had said once, his voice low and thoughtful, is a stitch in the great fabric. Sometimes the quiet threads hold the whole pattern together. Morty liked to imagine that somewhere in the vastness his own thread shimmered quietly, fragile but essential, part of something far larger than himself. As the night deepened, Morty let his thoughts drift like clouds across the sky. He thought about the people who mattered most, the steady warmth of summer, whose laughter was like a soft flame that never burned too bright. The quiet wisdom of his friend who understood without words. And Rick, whose love, even from afar, was a quiet tether to a past both wild and wonderful. He realized that love wasn't always loud or grand. Sometimes it was the simple act of being there, present, patient, and kind. The moon slid slowly across the sky, casting silver light that pooled like liquid silk on the floor. Morty's eyes grew heavy, but he didn't rush to sleep. He savored the quiet, the way the night seemed to breathe alongside him. He thought about how much he had changed, not in the explosive, dramatic ways of his past, but in the subtle shifts of his heart and mind. He was learning to be gentle with himself, to embrace the slow unfolding of growth without judgment. And in that quiet embrace, Morty found a kind of peace that no portal or adventure could ever give. With a soft smile, he whispered into the dark, "I'm here." And somewhere beyond the stars, his thread wove quietly onward, and with that he stretched into the stars. There was a certain magic in the way morning light softened the edges of the world. For Morty, dawn was never just a time. It was a gentle awakening, a quiet ceremony, where night's shadows slowly gave way to the promise of day. He liked to rise early before the world stirred fully awake. In those still moments, the air was cool and carried a faint sweetness, as if the earth itself was breathing in slow, deep sighs. On this particular morning, Morty found himself drawn to the old wooden bench by the lake, a place where time seemed to stretch and fold, untouched by the rush of hours. He sat down, feeling the smooth grain beneath his fingers, and gazed out at the water's surface. The lake was calm, a perfect mirror reflecting clouds drifting lazily across the sky. The quiet ripples at the edges whispered soft songs as if the water was sharing its own kind of secret. Morty's thoughts drifted to the idea of reflection, both the one in the water and the one inside himself. He thought about how sometimes the clearest answers came not from seeking outward, but from sitting quietly and looking inward. He remembered a time when he had been swept along by chaos, trying to grasp control over everything around him. But now he saw that strength was often found in surrender, in allowing the flow of life to move through you without resistance. The bench creaked gently as a soft breeze brushed past, carrying the scent of pine and fresh earth. Morty closed his eyes and let the sounds and smells settle around him like a comforting embrace. He thought about the people who had touched his life, the unspoken kindness of summer, the steady patience of his friend, and the distant but unbreakable bond with Rick. Each of them was like a thread in the tapestry of his days, woven with care and love, even through moments of distance and silence. Morty realized that these connections were the true anchors in his life. Not grand gestures or heroic feats, but simple presence and understanding. As the sun rose higher, painting the sky with soft golden blush, Morty opened his eyes and smiled. The world was vast and full of unknowns, but here, in this quiet moment, he felt, held, assistant. He reached out his hand, imagining the invisible threads that linked him to those he loved, delicate, shimmering lines that stretched across time and space, never breaking. And somewhere, beyond the reach of sight, his thread stretched into the stars. And with that, he stretched into the stars. The evening settled softly, wrapping the world in a cloak of quiet shadows. Morty sat near the flickering glow of a small fire, the gentle crackle and warmth pulling him deeper into the stillness of the night. He thought about the strange rhythm of his days, how moments of calm could emerge like unexpected stars in a sky once crowded with chaos. It was a rhythm he was learning to listen to trust. The firelight danced across the rough wood of the bench, painting shifting shapes that felt like whispers of stories waiting to be told. Morty's thoughts drifted back to the days when adventure was loud and wild, when every second seemed pressed with urgency. But now those days seemed like distant echoes, soft and faded. He reached out and caught a glowing ember in his palm. The heat was gentle, like the quiet courage that had grown inside him, small but persistent. Morty thought about the quiet acts that often went unseen, the smile shared when no one was looking, the hand extended without expectation, the simple kindness that needed no applause. These were the moments that shaped him now, the true marks of growth. A breeze stirred the night air, carrying the scent of pine and earth, a gentle reminder of the world beyond his thoughts. Morty breathed it in deeply, feeling the slow pulse of life around him. He remembered Summer's words from long ago about the bravery of stillness, and he felt a tender warmth bloom inside his chest. Sometimes being quiet was the greatest strength. The stars above blinked softly, ancient and knowing. Morty smiled, feeling the invisible threads of connection stretching outward, linking him to the people he loved, the places he had been, and the dreams yet to come. He let his mind float like a leaf on a calm stream, carried gently by the flow of night. And somewhere, beneath that vast canopy of stars, Morty stretched quietly, ready for whatever the dawn might bring. And with that, he stretched into the stars. Sometimes the softest memories come wrapped in the quietest moments. Morty found himself holding on to these like fragile petals, delicate yet full of meaning. One afternoon, as the sun filtered through the leaves, casting dappled light onto the worn path, Morty wandered toward the old oak tree that stood like a gentle sentinel near the edge of the garden. He remembered when he was younger how he'd sit beneath its sprawling branches, tracing the rough bark with his fingers, feeling the steady pulse of life that seemed to hum quietly beneath the surface. The tree had been there long before him, rooted deep in the earth, steady and unchanging, while the world around it shifted like clouds. Morty thought about how, in some ways, he was like that tree, sometimes swayed by the winds of change, but always holding firm at his core. He closed his eyes and leaned his head back against the cool bark. The air was filled with the soft hum of bees and the distant call of a bird. Everything felt still, wrapped in a peaceful embrace. He thought about the lessons he had learned, not from grand adventures or loud declarations, but from the gentle, steady moments of growth. The kindness that blossomed quietly in the heart, the patience to wait without fear, the courage to be soft in a world that often demanded hardness. These were the true victories, the invisible triumphs that no one saw, but that shaped the soul. Morty smiled softly, feeling the quiet strength that had grown inside him, like roots reaching deeper into the earth. He thought of the people who had helped him grow. Summer, with her warm laughter and steady presence. The friend who listened without judgment, and Rick, whose love, though complicated, was a thread woven deeply into his being. The tree seemed to whisper something old and wise, a lullaby without words, a reminder that growth takes time and that even in stillness there is movement. As the light softened toward evening, Morty stood and stretched his arms wide, feeling the sky expand around him. And somewhere beneath that vast sky, he stretched into the stars. There is a certain softness to twilight, when the world seems to hold its breath between day and night. Morty found these moments comforting, as if time itself was pausing to exhale. The colors bled gently from gold to lavender, and the sky was a quiet promise whispered just before sleep. He sat on the worn steps of the porch, legs stretched out, watching as fireflies began to blink, their slow, steady rhythm like tiny lanterns, waking from a long rest. Morty thought about how these small lights were like the quiet joys scattered through life, easy to overlook, but essential to the heart's map. He remembered when Rick had once told him, Sometimes the brightest lights come from the smallest sparks. It was a simple truth, but one that had taken time to understand fully. The fireflies drifted lazily, their glow pulsing softly in the cooling air. Morty let his thoughts wander, tracing the invisible threads of connection between moments and memories. He thought about Summer's laugh, that clear, bright sound that could cut through the heaviest clouds. About his friend's patient presence, steady and sure like the earth beneath his feet. And about Rick, whose love, complicated as it was, remained a quiet current running deep through everything. There was no rush here, no urgency to fix or change. Just the slow unfolding of understanding, like petals opening in the gentle dark. Morty breathed in the night air, feeling the cool calm settle inside him. It was a kind of peace he hadn't known before, not the silence of absence, but the softness of acceptance. He smiled softly, knowing that the journey wasn't about reaching a destination, but about learning to be present with each step, no matter how small. As the stars began to pierce the darkening sky, Morty leaned back, feeling the earth steady beneath him and the infinite above. And somewhere, among those distant lights, he stretched into the stars. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's going to be okay, man. But would you like me to write chapter 13? You said write C chapter. ChatGPT said it looks like your message got cut off. Did you want me to write a specific chapter number or part of the story? Just let me know which chapter or what you'd like next. You said write chapter 13. ChatGPT said here's chapter 13. Gently unfolding the story, about 1,100 words. The morning unfolded like a quiet song, soft and steady, as if the world itself was humming a lullaby. Morty woke to the delicate glow spilling through the curtains, the light folding around him like a warm breath. He sat up slowly, savoring the ease of the moment. There was no rush, no demand to be anywhere else. Just the gentle rhythm of a day beginning with possibility tucked softly in its folds. Morty stepped outside, the air cool and fragrant with dew. The garden was alive with whispers, leaves brushing softly, flowers nodding in the breeze, and somewhere nearby, the faint trill of a bird's song. He wandered to the little pond at the edge of the yard, where water lilies floated like soft dreams on the glassy surface. Morty knelt beside the water and watched the gentle ripples spread outward as a dragonfly skimmed the surface. There was a stillness here that felt like an old friend, familiar and steady. Morty thought about how sometimes the loudest adventures happen in silence, in the spaces between breaths. He thought of Summer, who could fill a room with laughter, but also knew how to hold quiet moments with grace. Of his friend, whose calm patience was a steadying force, like the earth itself. And of Rick, whose presence, even when distant, was woven into the fabric of his days. Morty smiled, feeling the invisible threads that connected them all, threads made of care, trust, and quiet understanding. He reached out and traced a finger through the cool water, watching the ripples widen and fade, a simple reminder that every small action touches the world in ways unseen. The day stretched ahead, full of soft light and gentle promise. Morty took a deep breath, letting the calm settle in his chest like a steady flame. And somewhere, beneath the endless sky, he stretched into the stars. There's a quiet strength in the way leaves fall in autumn, drifting slowly to the earth, their journey soft and unhurried. Morty often found comfort in watching this gentle dance, the way endings could be tender and change could wear the cloak of calm. One afternoon, he wandered along the winding path, Through the woods near his home, the trees stood tall and steady, their branches adorned with the warm golds and soft reds of the season. The air smelled of earth and rain, fresh and deep. Morty breathed in the quiet, letting the coolness settle in his bones like a gentle balm. He thought about how life was much like this forest walk, a series of small steps, sometimes uncertain, sometimes sure, but always moving forward in its own time. He remembered Summer's soft smile when things were hard, her way of reminding him that even the smallest light could hold the darkness at bay. He thought about his friend's quiet presence, steady and patient like the ground beneath his feet. And of Rick, distant, complicated, but a constant thread in the tapestry of his days. Morty felt a calm swell inside him, a feeling of gratitude for these connections, for the gentle love woven through his life. He knelt down to touch a fallen leaf, its edges crisp but still vibrant. Holding it softly, he whispered a quiet promise to himself, to be gentle with change, to embrace the unknown with a tender heart. The wind stirred the branches above, carrying a lullaby without words, a song of letting go and holding on. Morty stood and stretched, feeling the cool air fill his lungs, the sky above vast and waiting. And somewhere, beyond the trees and stars, he stretched into the stars. Sometimes the smallest moments hold the deepest truths. Morty found this to be true on a day that began like any other, yet held within it the soft unfolding of something tender and new. He was sitting by the window, watching the slow dance of clouds across a pale blue sky. The sunlight spilled in quietly, warming the room like a gentle touch. Morty's mind wandered to the many little things that had shaped him. The way Summer's laughter could chase away the dullest thoughts, the steadfast calm of his friend who understood without needing words, and the complicated love he still felt for Rick, woven through memories both bright and shadowed. He realized how these threads formed a delicate tapestry, each one important and irreplaceable. As he sat there, a soft breeze brushed past, carrying with it the scent of jasmine and fresh rain, a reminder that life, like the weather, was always changing, but always returning to moments of quiet beauty. Morty thought about how much growth had come from patience, learning to be gentle with himself, to listen to the slow unfolding inside. He smiled softly, knowing that the journey was not about rushing or fighting, but about being present with whatever came next. Outside, a bird sang a clear, steady note, a lullaby for the soul. Morty stretched his arms wide, feeling the calm settle deep within, a steady flame glowing softly. And somewhere, beneath the endless sky, he stretched into the stars. Night held its breath like a soft secret whispered between the trees. Morty sat quietly on the old porch steps, the world wrapped in a gentle hush that felt like a tender embrace. Above him the stars blinked slowly, their light distant yet somehow intimate, as if they were watching over him with quiet care. He thought about the strange, twisting path his life had taken, how moments of chaos had softened into calm, how confusion had slowly folded into understanding. The night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of pine and damp earth, grounding him in the present. Morty's thoughts drifted to Summer, whose laughter was like sunlight breaking through clouds, and to the friend whose steady presence was a quiet anchor in a swirling world. And of Rick, whose complicated love lingered like a distant melody, sometimes sharp, sometimes soft, but always part of the song of his life. He realized how these connections, fragile and strong all at once, were the true roots beneath the surface of his days. The stars above seemed to pulse gently, their light a slow heartbeat in the dark. Morty closed his eyes and breathed in deeply, feeling the calm spread like a soft tide through his chest. Sometimes he thought, the greatest courage is found in stillness, in the quiet moments where the soul listens most clearly. He stretched his arms wide toward the night sky, feeling the infinite reach of stars and dreams. And somewhere, beyond the whispering trees and soft shadows, he stretched into the stars. There's a quiet magic in the way rain falls, soft, steady, like a whispered lullaby from the sky. Morty sat by the window, watching droplets trace slow paths down the glass, blurring the world beyond into gentle shapes and colors. The steady rhythm was soothing, a gentle reminder that even the sky sometimes needs to let go. He thought about how much of life felt like this rain, moments of release, of cleansing, of quiet renewal. Morty's thoughts drifted to the small acts that often went unnoticed. A hand held in silence, a smile given without expectation, a quiet word that held more meaning than a shout. He remembered Summer's steady kindness, her ability to hold space without needing to fix anything. The friend who listened with patience, whose presence was a calm shore in a restless sea. And Rick, whose love was complicated, sometimes stormy, sometimes still, but always there beneath the surface. These connections, Morty knew, were the true shelter from life's storms. The rain slowed to a gentle mist. The world outside softened into a watercolor dream. Morty leaned back in his chair, letting the quiet wash over him, feeling the steady pulse of calm growing inside. Sometimes the deepest strength is found not in fighting the storm, but in learning to dance softly within it. He stretched his arms wide, imagining the rain as a gentle tide carrying him forward. And somewhere, beneath the mist and stars, he stretched into the stars. The morning light slipped softly through the curtains, spilling gold across the quiet room like a gentle promise. Morty woke slowly, the world around him still wrapped in the tender hush of dawn. He sat up, letting the calmness settle deep inside, a quiet peace that felt like the slow unfolding of something precious. Outside, the garden breathed in the early light, flowers turning their faces toward the sun, leaves trembling gently in a soft breeze. Morty stood and moved toward the window, watching as the day stretched itself open, slow and sure. He thought about the way moments like this held a kind of magic, not loud or dazzling, but quiet and steady like a heartbeat beneath the surface. There was a wisdom in waking gently, in allowing each day to arrive without rush or demand. Morty remembered the people who had shaped his days. Summer, with her warm laughter and steady strength, his friend, whose calm presence was a grounding force, and Rick, whose complicated love had taught him both pain and resilience. He smiled softly, grateful for these threads woven through his life, for the gentle love that had found its way in despite everything. As the light deepened, Morty breathed deeply, feeling the steady pulse of the morning like a quiet lullaby. Sometimes, he thought, the greatest adventures are found not in distant galaxies or wild escapades, but in the simple, unfolding moments of now. He stretched his arms wide, welcoming the day with open heart. And somewhere, beneath that endless sky, he stretched into the stars. Evenings have a way of folding the day into a soft, slow breath. Morty sat on the porch, the sky painted in shades of deep blue and soft violet, as if the world was tucking itself in gently. He felt the cool air brush against his skin, carrying the faint scent of pine and earth, grounding him in the moment. Morty thought about the quiet changes that had settled into his life, how confusion had softened into clarity and restlessness into calm. He remembered Summer's laughter, bright as a flickering candle in the dark, and the steady presence of his friend, who held space without hurry or judgment, and Rick, whose complicated love lingered like a faint melody, sometimes sharp, sometimes soft, always part of the rhythm of his days. Morty smiled softly, feeling the invisible threads that connected them all, weaving a tapestry of care and understanding. The first stars appeared, tiny points of light in the vast sky, each one a quiet beacon of hope. He thought about how small moments, an unexpected smile, a gentle touch, a shared silence, held the deepest kind of strength. Morty leaned back, letting the gentle evening calm settle in his chest like a slow tide. Sometimes, he realized, the most profound journeys happen in stillness, in the quiet spaces where the soul learns to listen. He stretched his arms wide, feeling the night sky stretch back, endless and full of possibilities. And somewhere, beneath those twinkling lights, he stretched into the stars. The morning sun poured gently through the window, painting soft patterns on the wooden floor. Morty sat quietly, the world outside slowly waking, like a gentle sigh. The day felt like a promise whispered just for him, wrapped in light and possibility. He closed his eyes, breathing in the stillness, feeling the steady rhythm of his own heartbeat, a quiet drum guiding him through the day. Morty thought about the path he'd walked, the small steps that had led him here, moments of kindness, of quiet courage, of learning to listen to the voice within. He remembered Summer's warm smile, a light in the darkest places, the friend whose calm presence was like the steady earth beneath his feet, and Rick, whose love, though tangled and imperfect, had been a fierce thread woven through the fabric of his life. There was a softness growing inside him now, a gentle strength born from all these connections. Outside, birds sang their morning songs, notes floating in the crisp air, simple and clear. Morty smiled, knowing that sometimes the greatest journeys happen in the small, ordinary moments, the slow unfolding of a day, the quiet breath between worries. He stretched his arms wide, reaching toward the light that filled the room. And somewhere, beneath the endless sky, he stretched into the stars. The late afternoon sun hung low, casting long, soft shadows across the garden. Morty walked slowly along the path, the crunch of dry leaves beneath his feet, a quiet rhythm to his thoughts. He paused beneath a towering oak, its branches heavy with golden leaves that whispered softly in the breeze. The tree stood like a silent witness to time's gentle passage, rooted deep and steady. Morty thought about the moments that had shaped him. Not the grand gestures or loud triumphs, but the small acts of kindness and understanding that quietly wove his world together. Summer's laughter came to mind, a bright thread of warmth even in the darkest days. The steady presence of his friend, whose calm and patience had been a refuge. And Rick, complicated, distant, but somehow always part of the story, like a shadow that both obscured and illuminated. He smiled softly, feeling the invisible ties that bound them, fragile, yet unbreakable. The sky above deepened into hues of rose and lavender, the day folding into night with a gentle sigh. Morty breathed deeply, letting the peacefulness settle into his bones, a steady flame glowing within. Sometimes, he thought, the quietest strength is found in acceptance, in learning to hold both joy and pain with gentle hands. He stretched his arms wide beneath the vastening sky, feeling the endless space and quiet wonder. And somewhere, beneath the fading light and rising stars, he stretched into the stars. The world outside was cloaked in a soft, silvery mist, as if the night itself was breathing slow and deep. Morty sat on the edge of the old wooden dock, his feet just brushing the cool water, ripples spreading like gentle whispers across the surface. Above him, the sky was a quiet canvas dotted with stars, distant lights that seemed to hum with a timeless song. Morty let the stillness wrap around him, feeling the cool night air settle softly into his bones. It was in these moments, free from noise and hurry, that he felt closest to something vast and tender, something beyond words. He thought about the subtle ways his life had changed, how each quiet step had led him deeper into understanding, how summer's laughter was like a warm ember in cold nights, and his friend's calm steadiness a harbour in restless seas, and Rick, always complex, a swirling tide of sharp edges and soft curves, a presence that had carved its way into his heart. Morty smiled softly, grateful for these threads that, though fragile, held him steady. The water reflected the stars in shimmering light, a gentle reminder that even darkness carried its own kind of beauty. He closed his eyes, breathing in the cool, sweet air, feeling the pulse of the night settle within him. Sometimes, he thought, peace is found not in searching, but in simply being, letting the world unfold around you like a slow, tender song. He stretched his arms wide, reaching toward the endless sky, feeling the quiet strength of stars both near and far. And somewhere, beyond the silver mist and whispered waves, he stretched into the stars. The evening sky deepened into a soft indigo, stars beginning to twinkle like scattered dreams across a velvet curtain. Morty sat beneath a quiet elm, its leaves whispering secrets to the night wind. The world felt hushed, as if holding its breath in a moment of gentle stillness. He thought about the winding path that had brought him here, not through grand adventures or loud victories, but through quiet moments of courage and kindness, small gestures that rippled outward like gentle waves. Summer's smile came to mind, bright and steady, a beacon through foggy days. His friend's calm presence, a quiet harbour where worries could drift away. And Rick, complex and flawed, a fire that both warmed and sometimes burned, shaping him in ways he was still learning to understand. Morty's heart swelled with a tender gratitude for these connections, fragile threads woven through his days, holding him steady when the world felt uncertain. The stars above shimmered softly, each one a lullaby without words, a promise of light even in the darkest moments. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the calm wash over him like a gentle tide, carrying away the weight of restless thoughts. Sometimes, he realized, strength is found not in loud declarations, but in quiet acceptance, in the soft surrender to what is. He stretched his arms wide beneath the vast night sky, feeling the endless expanse cradle him in its embrace. And somewhere, beyond the rustling leaves and twinkling stars, he stretched into the stars. The soft glow of twilight wrapped the world in a tender embrace. Morty sat on the edge of a grassy hill, watching the last traces of sunlight fold gently behind distant hills. The air was cool and still, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers and earth, a quiet reminder that the day was ready to rest. He thought about the slow unfolding of time, how moments, like petals, opened gently, revealing layers of understanding and grace. The simple joys and quiet sorrows that had shaped him, like soft footprints left in the sand. Summer's laughter echoed softly in his mind, a light that warmed even the coldest corners. The friend who had stood steady, a quiet presence through shifting storms. And Rick, whose love was a complicated song, sometimes discordant, sometimes beautiful, always part of the melody of Morty's life. Morty smiled softly, feeling the invisible threads that connected them, fragile and strong, all at once. Above him, the first stars appeared, shy and shimmering, like whispered promises in the gathering night. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the calm rise slowly within, a steady flame that would not be extinguished. Sometimes, he thought, Peace is found not in escaping the world, but in embracing its imperfect beauty with gentle eyes. He stretched his arms wide, reaching toward the deepening sky, welcoming whatever came next with open heart. And somewhere beneath that soft twilight, he stretched into the stars. There was a quietness that settled deep inside Morty, like a soft sigh carried on the evening breeze. The world around him had grown still, the night folding softly over every sound and shadow. He sat alone beneath a vast sky, the stars shining like distant fires, gentle beacons in the dark. Each one seemed to hum a lullaby only the heart could hear, a song woven from all the days and nights he had known. Morty thought about the threads of his life, summer's bright laughter that had been a light even in the shadows, his friend's steady calm, an anchor in restless seas, and Rick, whose love had been a tangled, fiery thread, shaping him in ways he was still learning to understand. He felt a gentle warmth in his chest, a quiet gratitude for these connections, fragile and strong. The night air wrapped around him like a soft blanket, carrying whispers of the past and promises of what was yet to come. Morty closed his eyes and breathed slowly, letting the calm settle deep into his bones. Sometimes, he thought, the greatest journey is not in the places we go, but in the quiet spaces where we learn to be at peace with ourselves. He stretched his arms wide beneath the endless stars, feeling the vastness cradle him in its gentle embrace. And somewhere, in the quiet hush of the night, he stretched into the stars.